Hello, everyone. This is the Drive Formula podcast, where we use trust, communication, and action to accelerate your team from 0 to 60. My name is Marcus Williams. This is Eric Lichty, founder of the Drive Formula. And last episode, we went through the preface and chapter 1 of the book, Driving Engagement. Hopefully you have purchased your copy so that you can follow along and read along and mark sections, ask questions. We'd love for this podcast to become interactive. So if you do have questions, please subscribe, post them in the comments, and we will get to them in future episodes. So today, we're calling this kind of a deep dive audiobook where we read the chapters, we go through, and then the next episode, we take more of a deep dive into that chapter and talk about the different, why, how it came to be, what we meant, a little more into the experiences that we shared, and give you really a background, a deep dive into the book. So we read the preface in chapter 1, so let's take a dive into that. And first of all, Eric, do you want to just talk about how this all came to be? Like why the Drive Formula?
Well, I wanted to combat depression on a large level, and I thought, what better way than do it with organizations? Organizations are having engagement issues. So at the same time, I'm like, well, if we can help people feel better about themselves and build themselves, then that will help productivity within the environment. So, and engagement for the leaders. So it has a dual purpose in it.
Okay. So you see you're wearing a mechanic shirt, and the Drive Formula is all about comparing businesses to cars. So how does a mechanic become an expert in mental health and engagement and just helping people be happy at work?
So I have a pretty vast career path. I've been a corrections officer. I've been a firefighter EMT for 14 years. I've been around people and I just love watching them. But at the same time, I've always been into cars. I actually started in the mechanic field when I was 15 years old, and I still am working on them. I never really stopped. But I started looking at people and seeing that they are all about process. Their minds are about process. And that's what a car is built on, is different processes that's heavily engineered to work for efficiency. So if I can break down how a car operates, not saying that people are like cars, but it's the same questions. Why are they feeling the way they are? Do they feel appreciated in the work environment? Do they have all the tools that they need to accomplish their tasks? And is the job environment right for them to thrive? And so the car is the same thing. It's about communication, organization, and do they have all the stuff to be able to drive a person forward? So it's a good mirroring, and people take for granted their cars every day, just like I believe employees are taking advantage of every day.
That's very true. And it was funny when we first started talking and just the genesis of this whole idea, and we would meet together and brainstorm and everything, and we started comparing, well, who's what in an organization, and we started taking all these car parts and trying to match them to people, and we realized that you are so many different things that we couldn't say that each individual is just one part, and that's kind of how the driving engagement, the book, came to being, is that you're driving your career. It's a broader part, and there's all of these different sensors and parts that help make that happen and help make that go. So you as a person are driving your career, right? And then the other one is, as a leader, you're help driving your team. And that's, the book dives into that a little bit more. But chapter 1, if we want to dive into that, one of the first things we talk about is just the level of engagement at work today. And we use a quote. It's from a Gallup poll that only 34% of workers said they were engaged in their jobs.
Yeah, and when I was actually doing my master's degree in 2020, that number was at 16%. Granted, COVID was that year. There's a few things that happened within that year. But imagine if your car was only running on 2 cylinders instead of 4 cylinders. For one, you wouldn't have the power that you'd regularly have. You couldn't come up to speed. It wouldn't operate efficiently, and it would be telling you through the check engine light blinking that it does have troubles.
Yeah.
And so what are employees? How do employees communicate and say, hey, my check engine light's on, I'm having troubles, to their to their leaders. I feel like that this is a good point to bring up, because I believe a car can communicate with a driver better than a employee can communicate with their leaders in some instances.
So we've got this little sensor that's a better communicator than human beings.
Yeah, that's boy. I mean, because if your car, it gives you signs and it communicates with you.
Yeah. And how sad is that, really? I mean, 34% of people are engaged. That means everyone else just goes to work and they don't care. Like, they have no buy-in. They have no desire to really do their job every day. And what are we taught as kids? Follow your passion, go to school, get training, do what you love. You can be anything you want to be. And then as adults, we all hate our jobs.
Yeah. And it's true. I mean, a lot of people aren't in their passions, or they just simply hate getting up and going to work because of the environment, or that they're not in the right job position. Somebody's switched them, and it's like a sensor over here that's a mass airflow sensor that meters the amount of air that comes in can't do what the same sensor that an oxygen sensor does, metering the amount of air coming out of the engine.
Right.
So one goes in and one comes out and reads it. Well, they can't do the same thing. So with a person that's saying that's a programmer, hey man, you're really good at that programming thing. Let's switch you over to the supply chain and see if you can really take that on. It's like, no, if people are in the right roles and responsibility, they thrive.
Right. And I mean, of course, there's times when you have to take a job just because you need to take the job to support your family. But when we're really going for that career position, we don't apply for jobs we don't want. I mean, we look at this job and we say, this is awesome. This is what we want to do with our life. This is what I've trained for. So then it's sad that this dream job turns into something that we dread. And we're also kind of conditioned through movies and TV and, everything and jokes that we love Fridays because we don't have to work anymore over the weekend, and we hate Mondays.
Yeah.
Like, we're conditioned to hate our jobs, and this is something that we want to do and which should like to do. And we spend how much of our life working?
70% of our day is spent working. And that's why we came up with this idea, because if we can change how you look at your job and you really appreciate it and you're grateful for it, but your leaders also see the value in you. It's kind of like your car. If you don't see the value in it transporting you from one location to another, it's going to end up giving up if you don't maintain it.
Yeah.
Check the oil, of course, put fuel in it every week.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're not saying, and I want to be clear, that we're not saying that means that you should love everything that you have to do at your job. I mean, every job has paperwork and reports and the mundane stuff, but the actual product or thing or that you're doing, you should feel engaged in, you should feel passionate about, you should feel like you're making a difference, whether that's writing code or fixing cars or my background doing an investigation. Yeah, there's hours and hours of mundane, but it was worth it because I was engaged in the job as a whole and what I was doing. I believed in it. So don't get us wrong in thinking that you should just love every little thing you do. That's just not life. That's not realistic.
No, and we have to look at that and be grateful for what we have. And then those things actually come across as you do have to do in the mundane things. It's like, hey, I appreciate this. This is part of my job. I'm going to do it the best of my ability so that I can create the right job environment and I can be the best I can be. A car operates with so many sensors, and if every sensor is doing their job, the whole organization goes forward right. But if that one sensor is not doing their job correctly, then just realize that's part of work. You need to go in and just do your part and be grateful that you have a job and just move forward.
Right. Gratitude is huge. And we talk about that in the book as well. An interesting thing is who becomes leaders. Is it the person who's best at that job, but may not necessarily be a good leader? Or is it a person who maybe has some knowledge of the job, but is more suited to be a leader? I don't think we do a good job of promoting the right people into leadership roles, or at least we don't give them the training. And this book is really focused on leaders, and especially I think new leaders can take a lot from it because they're starting that journey, but it doesn't matter where you're at. You can always be better. But how often do we complain about our job and we say that it's our leadership's problem? Like, it's not us, it's we have a bad boss, so that's why we hate it.
Well, the interesting part about cars is it's all about communication and organization. There's multiple sensors that are constantly sending feedback. I mean, sparking and just monitoring everything that's happening inside that engine. It gives positive feedback all the time. And so what do we do as employees? I had a job that I feel that I could have been better communicating with them because I didn't realize how good I was doing in the job. And at the end of it, when I went to quit, they told me, they're like, we never had to worry about your position. You always had your position covered. I'm like, well, you never told me that. But on the same hand, I could ask them for a performance review and said, I'd like to know how I am doing. And that's not defensive or anything like that. I just want to know how I'm doing. And so sometimes as employees, we need to start asking questions so that we can know what we're doing.
Yeah.
You know?
There's definitely a big responsibility for employees as well. It's not just leaders.
Yeah.
And some of the best leadership lessons I've learned is when I was a leader and failed and did it wrong. And now I know, and if I wish I could go back and do it again, but I can't. So in the future, I know there are certain things that I will do better in the future because I've learned those lessons. And I wish I had something like this helping me because frankly, the leadership training that I got was bad. And there's a story in the book that I shared that I went to this new leader training, and it was probably 3 or 4 days. And a lot of it was going over the policies and, what to do when there's an accident, what to do when you have to discipline an employee, what to do, like all these policies and procedures type thing. But they also included the leadership training on how to be a leader. And that was the part that I felt was the most important because I can read a manual. But, give me this information, give me this knowledge. And it was all going great until, like I said in the book, one of the senior leaders came down from Washington, D.C., flew down just to talk to us for an hour. And he straight up said, you're on our team now. It's us against them. And
Yikes.
he set up just so everything else that we'd been taught that entire seminar went out the window. All this stuff about adaptive leadership and everything went out the window because one of the senior leaders of the organization, close to the very top, came out and said it's an adversarial relationship between supervisors and employees, and that's just the way it is, and either you get on board or you get out. So everything else, that was it. That was my leadership training. And of course I recognized that was wrong and I walked away from it, but I also was a little scared because I knew that that's how they were viewing me as well, as a the lowest leader on the totem pole. It was pass the buck and it flows downhill. Yeah, basically is what they said. That was very disheartening.
Well, let's talk about what a leader's job is, in my opinion, because you look at a car, and can you actually do everything that a car does to actually transport you to one location to another?
Of course, no.
You can't fire the pistons. You can't roll the wheels. You can't generate power. You can't generate the comforts of the inside, the radio, the AC, the heater.
Yeah.
You as a driver cannot do that. It is impossible. So as a leader, why do you think that it's possible that you can sit there and micromanage and not let your employees do their little parts to drive the organization forward?
Yeah.
And they have to realize that and be the vision of good and start that at the top, because they cannot do it. And I was talking to somebody Sunday about one of their leaders, and they say that they are right on top of everything that happens and will not have trust, simple trust to let their employees do what they need to do.
Yeah.
And they keep getting things, letters written to them and things to try and help them change. The employees are actually proactively saying, if you could just do this a little bit different, just make these small, simple shifts, this would be a good environment. But they refuse not to change.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's creating an environment that's impossible. I'm not going to go push my car down the street to get transported to one place to another.
Right. And just like you can't do all the things a car does, that car is useless unless there's a driver.
Yeah.
in the city, and someone to turn the key and put it into gear. Like none of those things work. You have to have both working together, and when one of them is not working correctly or doing what they're supposed to do, you have massive failure.
Oh, big time. And if you look at the signs that the car gives you, I had a customer come in a couple months ago and they're like, we had leaking fluid under our vehicle. The check engine light was on. It was smoking. And I just needed it to get to this next location. And they said, when the check engine light comes on, you got like a month or two to really look at it, right? And it's like, well, it gave you every sign to get repaired, but they drove it so far that it blew up the engine. And so, I mean, that's employee burnout.
Yeah.
Right? Because you push them too far, and what's going to happen? So
ignoring those signs.
So that the car can communicate with you very easily. And I think that as employees, we need to learn how to communicate a little bit better. But as leaders, you need to look at signs. There's body language, there's engagement, there's you can see that they're not happy at work. As a leader, step back and try and diagnose that.
Yeah, figure it out. And maybe it could be a very simple solution that you will never know unless you just ask.
Yeah.
You just talk about it. Exactly. And one of the other things we talk about in the chapter, and why in introducing this whole concept, why it's so important, is that retention rates are extremely low right now. We're not only are people not staying in jobs for very long, I think it's the lowest it's ever been, but we also have millions of able-bodied workers in the United States who are just choosing not to work. So what's the problem? Right? So you can't, it's not back to, say, the boomer generation, the baby boomers, where they worked, they got a job, they worked at that job for 40 years because they were promised a pension, and that was the deal. You work for me, you put in your 40 hours a week, and then I take care of you the rest of your life. That's gone.
Yeah,
that doesn't exist anymore, right? And so people are, if they're not engaged at work, if they don't feel like they're valued or they're doing what they feel is important, they just leave. And it could be through this trend of quiet quitting, which when we talk about employee responsibilities, we need to bring that up because that's no good. Or they find another job and they just leave. I mean, so you have these employees who are not engaged. You're paying them a salary. You're paying for all their benefits, and they're spending their time on the clock looking for other jobs.
Yeah, and that's a huge problem because they're supposed to be productive, earning money, and the time that they're supposed to be getting trained, they're doing something else.
Yeah, and you're paying them to search for their job search is essentially what's happening. And whose fault is it, right? Because you're the one that's not helping them stay engaged and putting them in the position because they applied for the job. So there was a point in time where they wanted to be there, and there was a point in time where you thought they were the best person for the job because you hired them. So there was a point in time where you were both on the same page. I want to be here and I want you here. And yet now somehow those two paths have gone completely opposite directions.
Yeah, that could be actually blamed for a lot of not human interaction in the hiring process too, because it's a lot of computer based, and they see, and so that's other subjects that it's hard to see because every situation is a little bit different.
Yeah.
And it's like I was in a restaurant once, and there's this guy talking behind me, and I've got big ears at a restaurant. I listen to people's conversations. It's what I do. And so I'm a people watcher. And he just was telling his wife, he's like, I just don't know how you do it. And I was like, okay, sparked my interest. And they continued talking. He's like, how does somebody work an 8-hour workday? I can see 4 hours, but I don't understand 8 hours. And I'm like, wow, that was pretty interesting. And so my kids, I tell them they have to work. I try to give them a work ethic. Is it coming from families? There's a lot of different things, but as leaders, that's where you have to step in and say, okay, we have a different generation that we're dealing with. We have to see what drives that generation.
Yeah. Because
every generation is completely different. We talked about the baby boomers. They're ones that just go in and just get things done, and they they do complain, but they still do the work. I've worked with a few of them, and man, did they complain. I wish I would never have listened to them and just done my job. There's nothing wrong with that. That's their generation, and that's okay. But the newer generation, there is ways to drive them and to help them to see the importance of work. And so that's where we'd like to see, the striving engagements, different ways to think about,
Yeah, and that's a great point. There are definitely generational differences. And one thing as a leader, I think when you hire someone and you're working with someone, you can look at it more as a job or task-based career or job instead of time-based, because the example in me, for things that I do well, I can do quickly. And so there was one point where I had a boss, and he was, I'm sure we'll talk about him throughout this podcast because he was a monster of a boss. But anyway, he started chewing me out one day because I had started at the same time as another employee. So we were on basically the same path. And this other employee was staying late every night, working till 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night. And she didn't have a family at home. She was single, which was fine. And she could have gone and done all these other things, hobbies or whatever, but she was staying late to get her work done. And so he came to me and he told me I was being a bad employee and not a team player because I wasn't staying late. And I said, is there a problem with my work? Well, no. Am I late getting things turned in on time? Well, no. So you just want me to stay here for the sake of being here? Yeah. If you were a team player, you'd be here. You'd stay late every day. I said, boss, that doesn't make any sense. If I can do the job in 6 hours that takes her 10,
it's time management.
That's time management. And isn't that a good thing? Don't you want someone? And she did a great job. I'm not saying she was a bad employee. It just took her longer to do the same work. So he needed to adapt to both of our abilities, and whether that meant giving me a little bit more because I could handle it, get it done in time, or her a little bit less, or just allowing us to do the job in the time that we need. But he wanted me to be her. That didn't make sense.
Well, and he wasn't diagnosing the situation correctly either. Right. He wasn't using all the information that he was given, because some people think that it's a badge of honor to work extra hours.
Right.
And so they want to see that it's like you're putting the time in. Well, that makes me think that they're not being productive during the day. If you have a time or a certain load that's given to you and you can accomplish it in 8 hours, why is it taking you 10 to 12 hours?
Right.
And so that's the way I would have looked at it, but they looked at it that they were putting in more hours, and I bet you were also on salary.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I basically said, look, if you got a problem with my work, let me know. I'll fix it. And if I need to stay late to fix it, I'll do that. But as long as I'm going home to my kids. I love my job, and I was very engaged in my job, but I also had a family at home. I had little kids who wanted to see their dad before bedtime.
Yeah.
And I wasn't going to stay late just to make him feel good.
Yeah, and that's work-life balance.
Right.
And so we work a certain amount of time, and that's what we're contracted to do. If we can't do that within the amount of time, there's a few factors, if you're overloaded, but if you're getting your job done within that time. So those are all parts of the whole driving engagement.
Yeah.
And that's what leaders have to look at. As a driver, you know that you have to push on the gas harder as you come up to a hill. Well, that's going to put more strain on your car.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the book, we talk about different leadership styles that it's like, you've got to be able to change. Just like you're driving a vehicle, you drive a vehicle that you're towing different than you drive just a regular vehicle.
Right.
And so we do talk about that more in the book. And that's the cool part, is because cars are something that are you have to adapt to a car. I had an employee once that used a lot of anger in working on a car. He broke so many things. And I'm like, dude, you're not going to win. This is an object that you have to have patience for, and you're going to break bolts and you're going to cost me time. He ended up leaving because he's like, I just don't have the temperament for it. I was like, you're absolutely right. But I was trying to tell him that it's like, you cannot win against a car. I'm sorry. They will win every time. And so as you drive the car, it's going to tell you, and it's going to stop. As employees, we have a little bit more grit.
Yeah.
And we have things that we have security, and we have the job. But what if the leaders really took a look at us and was like, oh, I'm pushing them a little bit too hard, or I need to change the environment this way.
Yeah.
Or how can I look at them and make their job just a little bit easier so that they can handle it? Because some people handle stress a different way.
And ultimately, we believe that you can, if you have the right person in the right job, that it suddenly becomes doable and even easier to adapt to those to be productive rather than trying to force people into things that aren't going to work.
No. And so that's going to bring on depression, and therefore, production is going to go down.
Yeah.
And so that's why we're doing this book. We're really trying to help people to feel good about their jobs, to feel like they are valued there. And that's what changes how engagement is had.
Absolutely.
But you have to take each situation differently. Each person is a individual.
Right.
And they bring their own value to the table.
Right.
So, yeah.
And I think that was a good dive into chapter 1 and the preface. So if you have questions or comments, please leave them and we'll address those in future episodes. And ultimately, this whole thing is, right, the book isn't this big, huge, thick book. It doesn't take 40 hours of training to learn these concepts. And that's the whole point, is that you can increase employee morale, mental health, and engagement through instituting some very, I would say, common sense, but clearly they're not, because they're not
simple.
common, but simple changes or things to think about that could just completely change the way that your team works, your productivity levels, just the whole feeling, morale at the office can change when you apply these, and they're not hard.
No.
It's really about just being a good human being with your employees.
Well, and being able to see what's actually happening.
Yeah.
I mean, you drive a car every day. That's why this analogy is so awesome, because you're already doing the majority of it.
Right.
And if you're really hard on your car, then guess what? You're going to probably be hard on your employees because you have a lot of unreal expectations.
Yeah.
So that's why it's cool. You're going to go out to your car and you go, oh, hey, those lights just came on. It's communicating with me.
There you go.
So that's why this is fun. It's easy to understand. We're trying to make it simplified and something that you do already every day.
Yep.
So, yeah.
All right. So that's this episode. Thank you for watching. Again, this is the Drive Formula. I'm Marcus Williams. This is Eric Lichty. And with the holidays, we probably won't have a new episode out for a couple of weeks, but look for it, subscribe, and click that notification bell on whatever service you use. And this is available on pretty much every podcast service you can think of. So whatever you use, you should be able to find us. So share, tell your friends, let them know, and hope you enjoy. And we'll see you next time on the Drive Formula Podcast.
Happy holidays.